Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We just wanted to have a conversation about this idea of modesty because it's one that I think in church we typically avoid until it's like we have to give rules about something. And then it's like, okay, but why are those a thing? I think it's very confusing because a lot of the scripture that is quoted when we're talking about modesty has a lot of contextualization, like braiding hair and stuff like that. So I'm going to let a different verse be our guiding principle throughout this conversation, and I guess we'll get to that here in a minute. But I think, and you were talking about this beforehand, we want to approach this conversation with humility and not to like shame anybody or anything like that. So
Sure.
do you want to share some of what you were?
Well, I just think anytime we have a conversation, we need to, if our goal as Christians is to make heaven crowded, we're not going to do that if we come across as high-handed and judgy about things. And I'm reminded of Matthew 7, 3 through 5, and I love the way that the Message says it. It says, don't pick on people, jump on their failures, criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, let me wash your face for you, when your own face is distorted by contempt? It's this whole traveling roadshow mentality all over again, playing a holier-than-thou part instead of a just living your part. Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be able to offer a washcloth to your neighbor. And so I think maybe some of the sermons you've done over the last 4 weeks with the sexual integrity and pornography and confession, maybe they haven't touched someone because that's not their struggle right now. Maybe this modesty isn't their struggle right now. But we all have part of our lives that we haven't surrendered to God. Our music, our books, our language, our gaming habits, whatever it is. So I feel like we need to look at this, not looking out over the crowd and our friends list of who isn't doing this, but as a personal reflection of a part of our sexual integrity.
Sure, yeah. I think when people typically talk on this issue or think about this issue, we're thinking about, what there's like two ends of the spectrum, right? There's the people who like wear turtlenecks and like dress like the nuns and don't ever like show any part of your body ever. And then there's the opposite end of it, which is like, well, we don't want to body shame people, and God created our bodies, so we should be proud of them and not ashamed of them and not have to hide them, which shame has, as I'm saying that out loud, reminding me of some Genesis vibes where like they literally hid their shame because of sin in their nakedness and stuff. But like there's two ends of that. I'll just clearly share my bias. I fall onto one end of that more than the other. I feel like kind of like when your parents said growing up, like if you can't say anything nice at all, like anything nice, don't say anything at all. And so I'm more in that mindset of like, well, if you can't, wear anything that's not revealing, then or if you're not sure what to wear, then probably wear more than err on the side of safety. In other words, is what I'm trying to say with that, because that analogy doesn't always apply. It almost sounded like I was going to say like, yeah, dress right, don't dress anything at all. But that's not what I was trying to say with that. I was trying to say like, err on the side of safety kind of thing.
Right.
Can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. If you're not sure if it's okay, then just cover it all up. That's where I tend to lean. And over the years, I've kind of changed a little bit my thinking on that. I know we've talked about this for the last several weeks because this is an issue that seems to come up just in our groups as we talk, but also just as we analyze our culture at large.
We live life.
This is probably a pretty relevant conversation. And so we want to have it with, like you said, with grace. And just give maybe there's a passage that says, take every thought captive. So how can we take this thought captive
and make it obedient to Christ?
And make it obedient to Christ, wherever that may be. So.
Well, and I would add, I know we were probably going to talk about this later, but I feel like a lot of times when we bring up this conversation of modesty, it is pointed at women because, there's a lot more that women usually show. But I mean, it has to go the other way too with guys. I mean, we're both boy moms, and I would say that as we begin this conversation, to just know we're talking to both men and women in this. So
Definitely.
don't think we're singling out any one person, or that we're, just talking to girls or just talking to boys.
Well, I think girls tend to fall fashion victims.
Yeah.
Women just tend to fall into that more, I think, because fashion for women changes a lot more than it does for guys.
I think too, like something that's changed, like probably when I was in high school or younger, I thought modesty was just a girl thing. Like it didn't apply to guys at all. And that's kind of where my tune has changed over the years as well, as like, statistically, like ever since smartphones came out, it seems like there's this rise in, like, I saw a study recently that 57% of young women are viewing pornography on a regular basis. And like, even though men are more visual and the statistics are higher for men, like this is an issue that affects both men and women. And so the modesty thing does relate to both men and women. And there's those shorts, like the chubby shorts, I think is what they're called. I keep forgetting to look it up before I talk about it, but they're a big brand. And a lot of swimsuits that are made for guys are like, what's trendy right now is the really short ones. I've known guys in the past who've like tried to stuff their sweatpants to make their butts look bigger. And so like, this is not just a girl issue. This is, to your point, definitely directed at both. So I appreciate you saying that. So as we talk about this, kind of like I said earlier, we could get into some of the passages where Paul's telling the church, don't, braid your hair with beads and wear gold earrings and pearls, all that kind of stuff. And he uses the word modesty, that would translate into English as modesty, but there's a lot of contextualization that has to happen in those passages. And so I think they have their place, and that'd be good to study at some point. The passage I really want to focus on is from 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 33. And this is just Paul writing to the church in Corinth. In fact, just 4 chapters earlier was the verse where we were talking in this series about flee sexual immorality, run from it, which goes into the how far is too far kind of thinking, and basically saying, well, that's the wrong question. You should turn and run the other way, instead of asking, how close can I get to the line, And so this is just 4 chapters earlier. He's talking about all these sexual ethics. And then in chapter 10, he says, and he's speaking not about modesty, but I think this applies to a heart issue that is directly related to modesty. He says this: I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. And this was specifically to Jews who wouldn't eat certain kinds of meat. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then don't eat it. Both for the sake of the one who told you and the sake of your conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. So in other words, you have a right to do something, but for the sake of the other person, don't do it. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? I feel like that's spoken a lot about in this area of modesty. Why are you using your conscience to judge me when this is, So, but then he goes, this is specifically about food. If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews or Greeks or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. I feel like that speaks to the very hard issue of this, because what I hear a lot of people say is, well, there's nothing wrong with what I'm wearing. I can wear this, Well, maybe you can, but I think a better question is it best? Is it wise? Does it take into consideration the conscience of everyone in the room rather than just your own? And so I told you my tune has kind of shifted over the years. Like, do you remember the last time you saw me at a swim party or anything without my shirt on?
No,
'Cause
but
you guys are both involved in our high school area. So
Right.
we went to Lake Erie a couple years ago at CIY. We went to the beach. Like, we had a swim party last summer
Right.
at a student's house. I don't take my shirt off of those things because of this issue, because I know that pendulum swings both ways. And I know it's probably not an issue. Most people hear that and be like, that's dumb. Like, guys take their shirt off to swim or whatever. Like, but as a matter of conscience for myself, I've gotten more conservative on that, and I just don't even want to make an issue out of things. So usually I just don't swim. Or if I do, I put a shirt on right after I get out of the water, or sometimes I even swim with a shirt on. It's very rare that I will do that. And usually it's contextual. It's, are we in a more intimate setting where there's just a few students, or there's tons of people and nobody's going to be paying attention kind of thing.
Right.
But in recent memory, for years, I don't remember the last time I went swimming like that. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, as a matter of conscience, for me, as it relates to this issue, I have actually changed the way I present myself for those things, because I don't want it to be an issue, if that makes sense. Am I
Ever.
out
You
of-
don't
Yeah.
ever want it to be called into question, so why put it
Right.
out there where it will be?
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think,
Is that, yeah, am I crazy for saying something like that? Like, give me your feedback too, or what do you think of some of these things as we read that and try to contextualize it for this issue?
Yeah, I think it has to, I mean, Missy and I were just talking before we got on here, like, I think you have to have an idea of what that boundary looks like. I don't think you're crazy for that. I think there's a lot of good reasons to do that. If we're, going back to what I said before, if we're asking girls not to walk around in bikinis, then, maybe we should be thinking and asking our young guys not to walk around without their shirts on. And I'm not saying that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, we
look at
should
both sides.
look at both sides of it. And one of the things we talked about earlier is having, a good set of Christian friends, same age, and then maybe someone older that you can talk to. Like, so what do you think about this? Is this okay? Like, is my prom dress that I'm getting this year good? Are these chubby shorts, as you said earlier? Do these look appropriate? Or, like, asking your parents. I mean, that my boys knew that was a rule in my house. I mean, I'm not going to go into details on that because they're not here, and I'm not going to bring them up in that. But I mean, they knew that was a
Right.
rule.
We have
Like,
rules for our boys as well. But I think you brought up something that was commonly said today about, I'm not responsible for what somebody else thinks. And I do think, and you and I had talked about this the other night when we were talking, that two truths can seem somewhat opposed, but both exist and be true.
Two things can be true at the same time.
Yes. So you are absolutely not responsible for another person's response to something. You're not. I can't control your response. I can't control your response. The other truth, though, is everything that is made or packaged is made that way or presented that way to elicit a response. And businesses do this all the time. They spend millions of dollars on their marketing and advertising campaigns because getting that picture is going to get a response. And they post things, for example, let's look at beer commercials. Everybody's having a great time. Like, it looks like being drunk at a bar is going to be like the best thing ever. You're dancing, they're all pretty people, they're all having fun. It doesn't show the alcoholism. It doesn't show the drunken driving. It doesn't show the wrecked relationships. All that is not part of that pretty picture that marketing wants to show you. And so I guess when I think about applying that to modesty, what is your personal marketing and advertising department saying about you? And how is that going to be responded to, even though you, again, we said you are not responsible for their response, but you are packaging yourself, and that will cause a response. So what is that?
Yeah, and it's a heart issue too, I think. We do have to look at that. Like, we're where is your heart? Like, what is your reason for, I mean, really for anything, but what you're wearing? Like, what is the reason for that? Like, if I walk in tonight, and I'm not going to, by the way, but if I walk in a little mini skirt, I mean, you know, I don't normally dress like that, first off, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying, for me, if I walked in like that, you guys would be like, what is Nancy wearing? Like, but either way, I'm just saying, where is my heart in that? Because then you were talking about this earlier, you can go the other way with it and go, we just look at the heart.
Mm.
That can go both ways. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you may have a really pure heart, but if we have that pure heart and we're looking for what God wants for us and how God wants us to present ourselves, you know, we're presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice. So what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
What should that look like?
It should look like honoring him.
Yes.
With our music, with our books, with our wardrobe choices.
Not just, you're right, not just what we're wearing. I mean, what's coming out of our mouths, you know?
Are we oversharing?
Right.
Well, and not even just modesty, getting things covered up, but what are the slogans on our shirts saying? What are they, what's the intent behind it? What's the band that we're saying is our favorite to listen to? So it's a lot of different things besides what we typically think is modest. I mean, you can be, brand immodest. That can be your big thing, and you are showing that off as what's important to you. Again, slogans or logos that are not really honoring God can be something that you need to look at your choices. Again, what's your point?
Yeah, and I would say, like, bouncing off of that, a couple of things. I mean, we do a similar sermon series every year, and a few years back, this girl has graduated, but this similar topic caused her to rethink what she was listening to, because she realized the things that she was listening to was causing her to think impure thoughts. And then bouncing off of slogans, you know, I'm okay to say this because I think sometimes we are very, we don't want to say how far a boundary should go. But, you know, right now, something that's very popular is the Playboy bunny. You know, you can go into just about any store that teenagers or young adults shop at, and you will see the Playboy bunny. That is just, if we're wanting to be, you know, empowered women and stuff, I think like to wear that out there is not causing the right image. Is that what
definitely. Well, I didn't even know that. That's kind of nuts. I don't ever go shopping anywhere anymore. I can't remember the last time I was in the mall. But yeah, that's nuts. I like how you're talking about that, because it's not just about is skin showing or not. It's also like, how are you representing yourself?
Yeah.
And what does your outward appearance say about your heart? Because that's something I have heard a lot of people say. I've heard moms say this. I've heard, you know, just friends, lots of people say this over the years, is that, well, and it's most of the time when I've heard this said, it's said within the context of trying to defend what someone is wearing. But it's, well, you know, if, you know, anybody who see that, they know their heart, you know, they know that person's heart. So, you know, it makes it okay. In other words, it doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside because people know their heart. And I think that speaks directly to what you're saying. It's like, okay, but what are you advertising with how you represent yourself, like with your outward appearance? What are you saying about your heart based on what people can only see? And I think there's some value to that and putting weight to that kind of thought, taking that thought captive.
Well, let's flip that to our language. If we had, you know, people, they know their heart, but the language that comes out of their mouth is not what they're professing is in their heart. We think that language is inappropriate for what they're trying to show. You know what I mean? So I think if we look at that on all areas of our lives, that what are we doing to honor him with those choices? You know, and I think part of it goes to, we all want to feel desired. We all want to feel accepted. And the Bible tells us that we are not to be of this world, but we are. And so we want that. And I think often we go looking for that in the wrong places. And we think that the clothes that the world shows in front of us, that's it. The music that the world listens to, that's cool. And we need to have that filter, that really makes us stop and think, okay, we're also, the Bible verse talks about being fearfully and wonderfully made, and God made you that way. And I've talked to this a lot with my sophomore girls. For you're a forever person from God. All the wonderful stuff that God made, your body, that's for your forever guy. That's not for the right now guy. And I think if you can get past that and realize what waits for you in God's plan, you can just know that your parents, your adults here, we all want the very best for you, and we are going to do everything we can to guide you that way so you don't make those mistakes. I guess just know that that's where our heart is for you.
Yeah, we want the best for you and what God wants for you. That's where we're coming from on this.
Definitely. So let's segue then, because I think that kind of applies to we're kind of beating around the bush in a lot of different ways, because we're not giving. There's going to be certain people out there that are like, give me the answer, give me the standard, give me what's right and what's wrong. But I mean, there are different body types where different things, like one type of clothing could be okay on one person and not okay on another based on body type. And so there's no, it seems obvious that there's no blanket like standard for all. And so for those who want that, like, well, say no belly, say no, short shorts below the fingertips, say like, these kind of standards we hear, but it's really difficult to say that. So I think a question that a lot of people today legitimately are asking is like, should there be a standard for modesty? And should there even be a standard at all?
I think we're in some ways I think in some ways in our society today, we've done our young people a disservice. And I won't go into long details about that, but when I know for sure when I was in high school, you did have to have shorts a certain length. They did, like if they saw somebody walk around, you got sent to the office, and that was, again, boys and girls.
Slogans on T-shirts.
Turn
them inside
Guys
out.
were not allowed to wear, and this was just public school. I didn't go to a private school. Guys weren't allowed to wear tank tops, like different things like that. So I think when you and I were talking the other day, I was talking about one of the past sermons that you did just in the sermon series, and saying, one of the questions that we get asked every year, how far is too far? Which shows me that people do want a boundary line. We want a boundary line. We want somebody to say, don't do this. But this conversation makes it, it's difficult to give a boundary line, because I could tell you what my boundary line, I can't talk, what my boundary line is, or what I think it should be for all young women. But that's not going to look the same for someone else, or maybe not even the same as their parents have given them a boundary line.
Well, it's like in the Old Testament, like the law makes you aware of your sin, right? So like we think the Old Testament had really like strict standards, but Jesus took those standards and leveled them up. The law said, like, because if you know the law, you will know where to look for the loophole. And I think that's just how we work. Go look at our law system right now and hire any lawyer to find out the truth of that. But Jesus doesn't say, like, when the Old Testament says, don't murder. Jesus says, if you are ever angry with somebody, you're committing murder in your heart, and we could dive into that deeper. But I think, also don't commit adultery. Well, Jesus says, if you've lusted, then you've committed adultery in your heart already. So he takes the standard and he one-ups it and makes it like, no, this is more strict than the loophole you're trying to get out of what's written and legalized. So there's this, the overarching theme is honor. Like, what is honoring to you, what is honoring to me. And that should be your question. What is best? What does it honor those around me? Does it honor God? Does it represent the image that I am bearing for the sake of Christ? You mentioned like the rules that you had even in public school growing up. I heard somebody, like, there's that saying, like, if a farmer buys land and he goes out to the field and finds a fence through the middle of it, and he just tears it down to make room for whatever he's doing, that's one approach. Or the other approach, is it better to do that, or is it to ask first, why is this here? Right? Because maybe that's there for a reason, to keep the coyotes out, or whatever reason. Like,
Right.
But if you don't know why it's there and you just tear it down, you could be causing more problems for you. So why do you think that fence was there for you growing up? And I don't think we've asked that question. We've just gone, oh, that's
Right.
ridiculous. We should just demolish the fence and have no dress code. Does that mean that everything is suddenly okay? Or does that mean we're letting wolves in, like, unknowingly? So why do you think maybe that fence was there for you growing up? And that might give us some insight as to, I'm putting you on the spot because we haven't talked about this, but
well, I think it was for protection, and for a lot of reasons. I mean, I don't know. Can you speak to this, Missy? Because it was
Yeah.
for protection, and it was also for not just for me, but for other people.
Right. And we've talked too about how people grow up with different models
Yes.
of what is considered modest.
Yeah.
Because there is a wide range. You talked about, and we can go from burqas to full on Victoria's Secret runway shows that now come into our living room that are, in our day, would never have happened. And our kids are seeing that and they're perceiving that as normal.
Well, and we all have this at
Right.
our hands at all times,
And
too.
so I think growing up, number one, sometimes I think we're kind of oblivious to what people think or are doing around us. So as a freshman in high school, maybe I wasn't thinking about the fact that I shouldn't wear that. And my dad said, absolutely, you're not going out of the house in that. And I didn't go out of the house. My mom didn't buy it for me. When we went shopping and I tried something on that was inappropriate, she would look at me and say, no, that's to this or to that. So I don't want to make it feel like if you don't come from a background where this has been what you've grown up with, that this is like maybe second nature to you.
Yeah.
But I do think, again, it's not just for the protection of virtue for the individual, but I think you talk about where do you position yourself for success, for godliness. It does that for other people around you as well. Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of just makes it where some of those issues don't even have a chance to start, because it stops things before they ever happen.
so that kind of goes to the boundaries talk.
Yeah.
Actually, at the time of recording this, we're going to be talking about tonight. Boundaries are good and boundaries are powerful. We actually find more freedom through having boundaries. And if you're wondering about that, go watch the message. But I think it's true because exactly what you're speaking to. We're saying, like, okay, so we're saying there should be a standard for modesty. What should that be? And that's where the crickets are, because everybody's going to have a different comfort range. I think we conflate what are people comfortable with and what in what is actually okay and what's biblical. And we conflate all three of those things. And some people make their most conservative comfort level the law for everybody. And other people, even to the point of shaming people, which I think is also a difficult approach. And then there's the other side that, will say, well, maybe should be no standard because it's about our heart. And we've talked about that. But
I also think you have to be really careful to realize everyone's in different places in their walk with God, their maturity level. And then we have people who have no walk with God at all. And I just want to throw this out there, because no matter what you are wearing, it is never a justification for unwanted sexual attention.
Oh,
And
For sure.
so I
100%.
think you have to be very, very careful that that is not a message that we, the church, Christians, are putting out there.
And I think that's a message the church has been guilty of in the past.
Yes.
And it should not be that.
Right.
And I just, again, we had talked about things like resources, and I want to say Sadie Robertson does this talk with her mom, and it's called A Messy Conversation About Modesty, and you can, YouTube it or whatever. And they brought up a lot of really good points, and I would just throw that out there to maybe go out there and watch that if you want to go a little bit deeper into this conversation.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Even like trying to get ready for this conversation, because we've been having these conversations for years. How do we address this issue? How do we, that's why I started getting very specific about if we're going to have a swim party, you do have to put some kind of blanket standard out there, because while that actually might be okay on certain body types, the majority of people won't be. So we have to put that out there. We've had this conversation for years. And I think one of the things we wanted to do was just to maybe have this conversation publicly so people can just maybe expand their thinking, or again, take every thought captive when it comes to some of this stuff. And as we talked about this over the years, that's just been one thing. This has been one thing that comes up consistently. And yet I think a lot of us have been too afraid to say something about it because we don't want to offend people. We don't want to push people away. Acts 15 says don't unnecessarily put obstacles in front of people who are trying to seek the Lord. And that could go one of two ways. You don't want to create an obstacle by body shaming somebody or trying to draw attention to the fact that something might not be okay. But on the other hand, you don't want to cause an obstacle for people by wearing something that does reveal a little too much or does distract others in the room, because you don't have to look at yourself. Other people have to look at you. And so I think there's that tension, and I think it's a good tension. It's not necessarily a problem to be solved, but a tension to be managed, as Andy Stanley would say. And this is one of those things. There's a lot of gray, but I think there's principles that can be applied to the whole. And I have some of my personal ideas on what those things would be, but when it comes to like youth here, I would even say there's a difference between like what we would say is a dress code for church events type stuff and what you're going to do on vacation, right? I would say, my inclination, my most conservative inclination would be like one of these two places is of higher importance to rid of distractions, which would be church. I mean, if I were making the laws, I'll stop beating around the bush. I'll say, if I were making the laws, there would be a standard where, nobody wears anything that causes anybody to stumble ever, right? Because we live in a hypersexualized culture, and I just don't think people are mature enough to handle it. But I think there's a difference between that and going on vacation. But even still, I would say there's a difference between girls, if you want to wear a bikini on vacation, like, okay, I don't think it's wise. Because again, what are you advertising about yourself? I would say there's even a difference between going on vacation, if you want to wear a bikini, and going on vacation, wearing a bikini, and then posting about it on Instagram. Because that's now living forever online for any of your peers to go and find and pull up on their phones. Like I think because we live in a technological era, and we talked about how technology is good and powerful a couple weeks ago, talked about the dangers of pornography. And I'm not saying girls wearing bikinis and posting on Instagram is pornography, but I am saying, is there a heart issue there? I think there's a difference between even what you want to do while you're on vacation and posting about it permanently online for anybody to find. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
I don't want to sound like I'm just being a fundamentalist, like cracking down on people, but if I had $1 for every time I got on Instagram and a bikini picture comes up, I don't want to be looking at that. I don't want to even open that door. I don't want my wife looking over my shoulder and seeing what's on my screen. I mean, what are you looking at, right? Like, it's just, it feels messy. And I'm speaking to how I feel about it. You tell me tell me if you think I'm off.
So let's back up to the vacation wardrobe versus the church wardrobe.
Okay.
Some of this may be age, honestly. I do not feel like my wardrobes have ever been different. again, I talked about my background was very strict. So literally what the bathing suit that I would wear to a pool party with the youth group is the bathing suit that I'm wearing on the beach with my family. The dress that I'm wearing to go out to eat with my husband is a dress that I would wear here. If I felt like the straps, it was a tank top and I didn't feel comfortable with it, I would throw a denim jacket or something over it, but it would still be the same fundamental thing. The thing you talk about with Chelsea, I think is something, it's a struggle to get teenagers to understand she's your forever person. You want to honor her by not looking at something else that's not yours to look at. And she wants to honor you by not wearing something that's going to encourage other men to look at her in a way that was meant for your eyes only. And I think when you are young and we're seeing all of this, like you said, this hypersexualized culture, it's really hard to imagine yourself waiting for all the things God has for you with your forever person, because it seems like it's so far off, and it seems like the reward and the attention right now is so much fun. Mm-hmm. So I feel like a lot of like the Instagram, it's the culture, and how do you make it where you value what's going to be more than you value what's right here and now.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. It's difficult to think that as much fun and as much turn on, whatever you want to call it right now, if you just hold on, if you just honor God with your body and your choices, your forever person is going to be so much bigger than you can ever imagine. And that respect and that desire and that appreciation, you can't understand it until you're there, and it's hard to teach that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think too, I think we are not of the culture, the age of growing up with
Mm-hmm.
social media.
Right.
So I think it's easy for us to say, don't post that. When
100%.
their entire lives have been, I got to post this. What am I doing? Oh, that's got to post.
Mm-hmm.
How do I say this? Oh, will that sound good if I post it? So I get what you're saying 100%, but I also think that's not, I don't even know. I mean, you've talked on this before that, before their brains are before your brains are
Fully developed,
you're making these decisions that are out there on social media, and that's a whole other talk. But I think they're not thinking that far ahead. They're just thinking about I was going to say too, I think there are different types of pictures. Like I think if me and Missy are on the beach and I'm taking a little picture and I post that out there, that's different than how I might put a picture of just me out there. Whether that be, and it doesn't matter what I'm wearing. And then the age groups and different things. And I don't think I need to go into details on that. I'm just saying, like, if there's a group of 5 girls on vacation together and they're bikinis and they're just standing there having fun, again, I know what you're saying. I know what they're thinking. They're just hanging out with their friends.
Yeah, and I just bring it up because I think high school girls are in one of two places, just like you mentioned. One, it's just that's where they're at. They live online. They just post what they're doing, and so they're not even thinking about that kind of thing. And to hear me even talk about that is like gross and disgusting and shocking to people who are like, why are you thinking that? So, well, because I didn't grow up in the era where that was okay. But people are either in that boat or they're in the boat of they know exactly what they're doing, and
it's deliberate. It's a cultured look.
And exactly. And they know that they're going to get more likes if they post something like that. And so there's that dopamine hit. Like there's some psychology behind that. That's not just like me attributing like
No.
ill motives towards somebody. I'm just
No.
saying like that's what our culture rewards. And so part of the reason I bring that up is just, if we're going to take every thought captive for Christ, then we should talk about these things and kind of open the door to like, here's what
Yeah.
other people might be thinking about the way you're advertising your brand.
And I
does that
think
make
too,
sense?
and I hope this has been a really good example of a conversation where we have examined a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different nuances within that conversation
Sure.
without any of us getting angry or upset or
Yeah.
I don't agree with you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's the kind of conversation we need to have within the church
Definitely.
about these types of issues. And I think it kind of all goes back to when we talked about marketing and advertising. They are cultivating, you guys are cultivating an image, a brand on your Insta, on your Snap, on, whatever you use. And some people are highly cognizant of that and culture it very strictly. Other people are just like, whatever, post the moment. So I do think, let's go back to what's your marketing and advertising department doing for you? How are they portraying you to the rest of the world?
And honestly, even for me, a bigger concern of like causing other people to stumble. That's a big one. Obviously, we talked about that a lot. We don't want to cause other people to stumble, but bigger for me than that, I think, is this issue of how you represent yourself. Because I know, I've been in youth ministry about a decade now, and I think the majority of the girls that I've interacted with that come to church, and even the guys, they're good kids. They most of them have great hearts. Even the ones that are like a little behind on their faith journey than their peers. Like, I think a lot of them have good hearts. They want to honor God. They want to honor their friends. They want. I don't.
They don't want to be a stumbling block to anyone.
I know, and I don't want to attribute ill motives towards the majority of our students, or past students or whatever. One of my bigger concerns is the way that they are advertising themselves. And I know there's more to them than maybe what that image says about them. But I don't want all their peers, Christian or non-Christian, that follow them at school, that follow them anywhere else, to see them, and they can't get past the image they're seeing to see the true person that is behind that, to see the heart that is for God, to see all that kind of stuff. So that's a layer that I would say is often missed in this conversation. Is, yes, we don't want to cause people to stumble, but also you as Christians, if you're claiming to be a Christian, you're ultimately representing more than just yourself. So what are you saying about your Creator by the way that you portray yourself as well? Are you pointing people to God, or aren't you? And I just don't think that's a filter that most kids use when using social media, or even in just when they're getting dressed in the morning, because it takes effort and time and maturity to unwind some of the cultural messages from what maybe a biblical approach or a godly message might be. And so hopefully this conversation cracks the door open on that kind of mindset a little bit more. Does that sound fair? Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal. The goal is that you can go back and at least unpack this a little bit and think about it. And again, it's not to open it up to look at your friends list and say, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that,
Sure, yeah,
and be
yeah.
judgmental. It is a conversation to make you look at your heart and say, okay, maybe I do need, if I'm asking these questions, is this appropriate? Maybe I do need to stop and kind of see what I'm wearing. And again, if this is not your struggle, just know we all have those things we don't lay before God.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is it your music? Is it your, like I said earlier, your gaming, your
100%.
books?
Yeah. And I do bring some of that up too, because like I did a poll on our Instagram a week or two ago asking, what's your idea of modesty? And in hindsight, I should have made it, there's a link to another app that will make your answers anonymous. I should have done that because I think nobody wanted to answer, because I got very few responses. But some of the answers I did get had to do with, way more than just the outward appearance, kind of what we've been talking about. But a lot of them did have a representation of that. And then I asked the question, have you ever seen a post that a peer of yours put on social media that made you uncomfortable or want to unfollow them? And 90% of the people that responded to that said yes. And so I think that speaks to this very issue, that just this is something that's out there. So we want to be able to take that thought captive and talk about it in a way that honors Jesus. And hopefully we've done that today. So as we kind of wrap up, thank you all for listening and watching. If you stuck around this whole time, again, this is not to beat anybody up, but just to speak transparently about this conversation, because I know a lot of you are having it and a lot of you are thinking about it, but it's not something that's talked about very publicly. So hopefully we're all still friends, and we're not using this to like you said, pick the speck out of each other's eyes when we have logs in our own. But is there anything else that you guys want to add as we kind of close off?
I don't think so. I think just know that if you don't feel like you've got someone at home that you can talk to, all of us here, even if we're not your specific group leader, I tell my girls all the time, if you don't feel comfortable coming to talk to me, go grab someone else. Anyone here will talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we're here for. I mean, we love you guys. And again, going back to what Zach and Missy said in the beginning, I mean, all of this comes from a place of love and kindness, because we love you and care about you and
want the best
for you. And I would say, I have said this a lot, that even going back to the social media stuff, I am glad that I didn't have to deal with social media, because I sought out attention a lot. So I would have needed some of this, is what I'm saying. So just know we love you. And with Missy saying that we can be there, it's true, because we've already been through some of these things. We maybe didn't have social media, but there were other things going on and heart issues that we had to deal with, or still having to deal with. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys for watching. And if you miss any of the past messages from the series, go back and watch those. Those are linked below. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, or add any thoughts, or reach out to any of us. We do have a few spots left for CIY Move this summer, so if you've not registered for that, make sure you do that while spots are available. And the cost is cheaper, because the longer time goes by, the more expensive those tickets will get. So thank you guys for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your week.